Hello students, today we are going to study the fifth chapter of supplementary reader, Footprints Without Feet, written by H.G. Wells. My dear students, before going to the text, we should know about the author who wrote these beautiful stories. Herbert George Wells was born on 21st September 1866 in England. He was a great writer who wrote novels, history, and science fiction. The most famous works of H.G. Wells are The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, and The Island of Dr. Moreau. He died on 13th, 13th August 1946. Now, my dear students, let us come to know about the theme of the story, Footprints Without Feet. The story Footprints Without Feet describes the story of a brilliant scientist, Griffin, who degenerated himself into a lawless person. Griffin discovered that human body could become transparent and invisible, but he misused his great discovery. He did not use the power of invisibility for the welfare of the society and humanity at large. He misused it to threaten, trouble, and beat innocent persons and rob them. He made illegal entries in stores and shops and stole things from there. He committed a burglary in a clergyman's house in Iping. Griffin remained invisible or unseen only when he was without clothes. If he put on clothes, he lost his invisibility and could be seen by the people around him. The lesson gives a message that misuse of science and its great discoveries can make even a brilliant scientist like Griffin a monster and a threatening lawless person. So, dear students, can a man become invisible? This is the story of a scientist who discovers how to make himself invisible. Does he use or misuse his discovery? Let us read and find out. Now, come to the text. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? As they gazed, a remarkable sight. Remarkable means noticeable. Sight means seen, met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. Further, footprints followed one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter, means dim and dim, and at last disappeared altogether, means vanished at all. Now, in the first paragraph, the author H.G. Wells talking about muddy imprints that were that was muddy imprints that were seen by two boys. When they saw muddy imprints, they were highly surprised. They saw muddy impressions on the step of a house in London. They were the fresh footmarks of a barefooted man. The boys followed them. The impressions got fainter and finally disappeared. Now, come to the next paragraph. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered, that means highly surprised boys, had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. Now, here in this paragraph, the author is talking about the mystery of footmarks. The mystery of footmarks was quite simple. The boys were following a scientist. He had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer, that means tramp, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. Now, in this paragraph, Griffin, a great scientist, but by nature he was an eccentric scientist. He carried out many experiments to prove that human body could become invisible. In the end, he swallowed some rare drugs and his body became transparent. He was a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house of his landlord. Griffin had to remove his clothes if he wanted to be unseen by the people. He became a homeless wanderer without clothes. He had no money. He left footmarks as he walked. Now come to the next page. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London, but his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter, the air was bitterly cold, and he could not do without clothes. It means he cannot live without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, Instead of walking without the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the door was shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regarding to expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. As soon with shoes and overcoat and a white brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store, that means provisional store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts, that means warm covers, heap of warm covers. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When he saw a couple of them now in this paragraph, when Griffin, the eccentric scientist, found himself in a big London store, the air was bitterly cold. Griffin was naked. Instead of walking about the street, he entered a London store for warmth. He enjoyed the pleasure of clothes and food freely. He fitted himself out with warm clothes there. He became fully dressed up with shoes, an overcoat, and a hat. After putting on clothes, he became visible. He had cold meat, that means he ate cold meat and coffee and drank coffee with sweets and wine from the grocery store. He slept on a pile of quilts. He didn't wake up until the assistants arrived next morning. Now, come to the next page. When he saw a couple of them approaching, that means coming near, he panicked and began to run. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more, he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. Chill means shivering. January air means in the month of January. Now, when two-person, a couple of person means two-person came near to him, means the scientist Griffin, he panicked and began to run, but he could become invisible only by taking off his clothes. He was totally naked, so he took off his newly found clothes. Once more, he became naked in the chill January air means in the month of cold or cool January. Now, come to the next paragraph. This time, he decided to try the stock of a theoretical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages round his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and, and a large hat. To escape without being seen, he carelessly, that means cruelly, attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he could find. Now, come to the next paragraph and try to understand the meaning. When Griffin, the eccentric scientist, went in Drury Lane, he hurried to Drury Lane, that was the center of the theatre world. He found a shop he was searching for. He came upstairs invisible. He came out of the shop wearing bandages round his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, side whiskers, uh, and a large hat. Then he attacked cruelly a shopkeeper and robbed him of all the money he could find. Now, let's begin the next paragraph. Eager to get away from crowded London, he took a train to the village of Iping, where he booked two rooms at the local inn. The arrival of a stranger at an inn in winter was in any case an unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all tongues wagging. That is a phrase, it means made all the people to talk about. Mrs. Hall, the landlord's wife, made every effort to be friendly, but Griffin had no desire to talk and told her, my reason for coming to Iping is a desire for solitude. That means loneliness. I do not wish to be disturbed in my work. Besides, an accident has affected my face. Satisfied that her guest was an eccentric, that means cynic, scientist, and in view of the fact that she had paid her in advance, Mrs. Hall was prepared to excuse his strange habits and irritable temper. But the stolen money did not last long, and presently Griffin had to admit that she had no more ready cash. He pretended, however, that she was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. Now, coming, coming to the next point of explanation, when the eccentric scientist Griffin arrived in Iping village, Griffin wanted to get away from the crowded London. He came to the village Iping. He booked 2 rooms in a local inn. Arrival of a stranger of such strange appearance became the talk of the people. Mrs. Hall tried to be very friendly with her guest Griffin. He told that he didn't want to be disturbed at all. He wanted to be alone. She thought that her guest was an eccentric and irritable temper. Griffin's case has finished. She told a lie that he was expecting a check at any time, at any moment. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode, a strange episode miss event occurred miss happened. Very early in the morning, a clergyman and his wife were awakened, that means aroused, by noises in the study. Creeping downstairs, they heard the chink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. Chink of money means sound, metallic sound of money being taken away from his desk without making any noise, and with a poker grasped means held, firmly means tightly, in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door and shouted, "Surrender." With a poker means iron hook in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door. He shouted, "Surrender." Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. He and his wife looked under the desk and behind the curtains and even up the chimney. There wasn't a sight of anybody. Yet, the desk had been opened and the housekeeping money was missing. "Extraordinary affair," the clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. Now, in this paragraph, when the clergyman was burgled, a strange episode occurred. The clergyman and his wife were awakened by the noises in the study. Very early in the morning, they came downstairs and heard the chink of money being taken from their desk. With a poker in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door. He shouted, "Surrender." He was surprised to see the room empty. They looked under the desk, behind the curtains, and even up the chimney. No one was there. He found the desk open and the money was missing. They were highly surprised, couldn't understand anything. Now, come to the next point, means next paragraph. But it was not an extraordinary, that means extraordinary, as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture. A little later that morning, the landlord and his wife were up very early and were surprised to see the scientist's door wide open. Usually it was shut and locked, and he was furious if anyone entered his room. The opportunity seemed too good to be missed. They peeped round the door, saw nobody, and decided to investigate. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time. And stranger still, the clothes and bandages that he always wore were lying about the room. All of a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff, means breathing from nose, close to her ear. A moment later, the hat on the bedpost leaped up and dashed means hit itself into her face. Then the bedroom chair became alive, springing into the air, means jumping into the air. It charged, attacked straight at her, means directly at her. Legs foremost, means first, as she and her husband turned away in terror, means great fear. The extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to be slammed and locked the door after them. Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stairs in hysterics. She was convinced, means sure, that the room was haunted, visited by spirits, means ghosts, and that the stranger had somehow caused these to enter into her furniture. My poor mother used to sit in that chair. She moaned, cried in pain. To think it should rise up against me now. The feeling among the neighbors was that the trouble was caused by witchcraft, means black magic. But witchcraft or not, when the news of the burglary at the clergyman's home became known, the strange scientist was strongly suspected of having had a hand in it. Suspicion, that means doubt, grew even stronger when he suddenly produced some ready cash. Though he had admitted, means accepted, not long before that he had no money. Now, throughout this paragraph, my dear student, would like to comprehend the meaning of this paragraph. Mrs. Hall furniture shows strange behavior. In this paragraph, the author describes that the landlord and his wife, Mrs. Hall, woke up very early. They found Griffin's door wide open. Usually it was shut and locked. They peeped around but found nobody. They found Griffin's clothes and bandages were lying about. All of a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear. A hat leaped. Miss jumped up and dashed. That means hit itself into her face. Then the chair became alive, full of life. They turned away in fear. Then chair pushed them both out of the room. The door was smashed and locked after them. Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stairs and started crying. He was sure that the room was haunted by witchcraft, by spirits. You know that the villagers suspected that the trouble was caused by witchcraft. When the news of burglary at the clergyman's home became known, everyone doubted Griffin's hand in it. This suspicion, this doubt grew stronger when Griffin suddenly showed some ready cash. He had no cash before a few days. Here, now, come to the last lines of this paragraph. The village constable was secretly sent for. Instead of waiting for the constable, Mrs. Hall went to the scientist who had somehow mysteriously appeared from his empty bedroom. I want to know what you have been doing to my chair upstairs, she demanded. And I want to know how it is you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room. The scientist was always quick tempered, that means short tempered. Now he became furious. You don't understand who or what I am? He shouted. Very well, I will show you. Suddenly he threw off bandages, whiskers, spectacles, and even nose. It took him only a minute to do this. The horrified, that means terrified people in the bar found themselves staring at a headless man. Now, in this paragraph, the author is talking about invisible man, how he shows himself. Mrs. Hall went to Griffin's room. He was there. She asked what he was doing to her chairs upstairs. She also asked how he entered a locked room. The scientist lost his temper. He became furious and cried, I will show you. Suddenly, he threw away all bandages, whiskers, spectacles, and even his false nose. The horrified men in the bar were staring at a headless man. They were staring in surprise. Just look at that headless man. Now come to the next paragraph. Mr. Jeffers, the constable, now arrived and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without a head. But Jeffers was not easily stopped from doing his duty. If a magistrate's warrant ordered a person's arrest, then that person had to be arrested with or without his head. There followed a remarkable scene, noticeable sight as the policeman tried to hold of a man. Get hold of a man means arrest a man who was becoming more and more invisible as he threw off one garment after another. Finally, a shirt flew into the air, and the constable found himself struggling with someone he could not see at all. Some people tried to help him but found themselves hit by blows that seemed to come from nowhere. In the end, Jeffers was knocked unconscious. Unconscious means senseless. As he made a last attempt to hold on to the unseen scientist. There were nervous, excited cries of hold him, but this was easier said than done. Griffin had shaken himself free, and no one knew where to lay hands on him, means where to catch on him. So, my dear students, let us try to comprehend and understand the last paragraph. Here, the author tells the encounter with Constable Jaffer, means the encounter of eccentric scientist Griffin with Constable Jeffers. The police constable who had been informed arrived now. He was totally surprised to find that he was to arrest a man without a head. There followed a wonderful scene. The scientist Griffin started throwing his clothes one by one. He was becoming more and more invisible as he threw off one garment after another. Finally, the man became invisible. Some people who tried to hold him were beaten by the unseen blows that came from nowhere. They did not understand from which place the blows came from. In the end, Jeffers was knocked unconscious, means he became senseless. Nervous cry and excited people were crying. Hold him, catch him. Griffin was invisible and free now, but still nobody catch him. And no one knew where to lay hands on him. Means they did not understand where did he go and how they will be able to catch him. In this way, once more Griffin, the eccentric scientist, became invisible and made himself free from them. So, my dear students, that's all about the chapter 5th, footprints without feet. I hope that you have understood well and comprehend well, and hope that you will write the questions answer by yourself in your notebook. So just go through the chapters, understand well, and write down the questions answer in your notebook. Thank you.